Good evening and welcome to the Guido Fawkes Speakeasy. I'm here with my drinking partner, the editorial director of the Institute of Economic Affairs, and crucially, a bit of a beer blogger as well, aren't you, Kristian?
That's right, yes.
Right. So we're here today because, of course, on Wednesday, the winter budget is about to strike. Of course, it's going to become more expensive to buy a pint to run a pub. So, Kristian, right, let's assume this golden nectar here costs £5, right? Mm-hmm. Unlikely in London, but across the country, about £5. Should we start by drinking the proportion of this beer which is taken up by the cost that goes to the brewery?
Let's do that.
Here we
Cheers.
go. Cheers. Mm-mm.
It'll be roughly until here, maybe a little bit more. Okay, so this is the part that technically goes to the brewery. This is the transfer that the pub makes to the brewery. But that, of course, doesn't mean that the brewer gets to keep all that, the money equivalent of that, because all the things that we will talk about in a second, which is the taxes and the regulatory costs that are imposed on pubs, quite a lot of those, the majority probably, are also, of course, imposed on the brewery.
Yeah.
So even this £1.31 that this represents here, this is not the pure gain of the brewery either.
Yeah.
They just have the same problem again.
£1.31, but there's still more to go. So next we got the wages for the pub staff. Obviously vary, so we're going to make a generalisation, but that is about £1.17. Cheers.
On average. Cheers. Okay, so this is what's left of the pub after subtracting the wage costs. But here, of course, we have to bear in mind, okay, wages, this sounds as if it's something that has nothing to do with the government, it's simply a market rate, but that is not how it works. This is also influenced by government policy. In particular, more recently, the minimum wage hikes, where, of course, the pubs have warned. They did say this is going to increase the price of a pint. And you might say, well, okay, but at least the people who work at the pub, at least they benefit. But even here, this is a bit of a double-edged sword with minimum wages. So some people benefit, some people get a higher wage than they otherwise would have. But it also means, of course, for the pub, they are likely to hire fewer people in the future. So that's why, especially around here, you've experienced this millions of times that you're at the pub and everything is slow, certainly at peak hours, because they are understaffed. And you think, why don't they just hire one more person? Well, that cost, that minimum wage cost, is a part of the reason. And so you got some people who just won't get the job at all.
So this is about, where are we now? So there's about 3 fingers worth here, okay? There we are. But we're not done yet. We've still got plenty more drinking to go.
Okay,
VAT,
next part.
Cheers. This is about 83p.
Okay, so subtracting VAT takes us about to this place here.
That right?
Which, okay, VAT is in itself I don't have a huge problem with, except one thing that they do with when it comes to taxing alcohol is, of course, that VAT is also applied to the alcohol duty. So you have, first of all, beer duty on this, and so that means it's taxed, and then you get a tax on a tax. It's a pure form of double taxation.
There we are, we're about halfway through. But shall we keep drinking? What do we got next?
Now comes beer duty.
Right, here we go. Cheers.
Yeah, so beer duty about 56p in a pint, but here we have to bear in mind, this is based on a standard lager or a standard ale. If, for example, if you like Belgian-style beers, they are often more high strength, they can have 8% of alcohol. Or
do you like those?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of those. They're just hard to find in this country, and part of the reason is beer duty. Because beer duty is, well, it's proportional to alcohol content, but once you go above a certain boundary, I think it's 8%, their beer duty goes through the roof. So then that's why even when you find it in a pub, it's quite often, it would be those where they don't even serve full pints, because otherwise you get a shock by the time they say it would be £15 or so per pint. So what they do is they go for shrinkflation at the pub. They say, this one we only serve in 2/3 of a pint, or even sometimes, I've seen this too, 1/3 of a pint. That's
what's
the
the
maximum.
point?
That's, yeah, it's basically just like a sample glass. But then again, this isn't because the brewer has a monopoly on this type of beer or anything. This is how beer duty works. Outside of those boundaries, outside of the normal strength boundaries, it goes through the roof, it just explodes. You get a massively higher rate. and that makes some of those beers just unviable in this country, which is a shame, especially this time of the year, because now this is when the winter beers should come out. Winter beers are traditionally a bit stronger. And whereas here, a winter beer, a Christmas beer, usually is just a reddish ale where they slap a Santa on the logo, but otherwise it's just a year-round beer.
Right, next we've got business rates, Kristian. That's roughly a finger's worth.
Yeah, let's
Ready?
get rid of that.
All right, now we've got national insurance that you have to pay to fund the wage bill. So that's about 29p. Here we go.
Yeah, so this is the part that that went up earlier this year. And of course, several pub associations and brewing associations have warned the government, saying if you hike the national insurance contribution, even if it is technically paid by the employer, this will mean the price of a pint, among other things, will go up. And that's exactly what happened.
We're nearly there, but I have to say, we're getting towards the bottom of this glass, and we still haven't made any profit yet.
There is not much left.
Okay,
No.
right, so now, Kristian, it's utilities. That is 25 pence. Again, it's about a finger's worth. Here we go.
Okay, utilities, this is of course there, we pay effectively a tax on net zero. Because this includes energy costs. Britain now has some of the highest energy costs, industrial energy costs certainly, in the world. And that is essentially the cost of net zero. It's contained in every pint of beer. It's not just when you heat your home, although that's of course when it matters more. But it is contained in basically everything that uses energy in some form. And running a pub is no different there. Therefore, every time you go to the pub, you pay a little net zero tax.
A net zero tax on every pint
you could
of
call
beer.
it that, yeah.
Disaster. Right, so we're almost there. I still haven't made any profit on this if I'm a landlord, if I'm a barman. So let's now drink the pub overheads, which are inevitable, but that's still another 11p on this pint. So
this is it. Now we're getting to the meaty part. Well, there's not much left. So this is basically the profit that a publican makes.
And it's out of a £5 pint, which is, again, rare in London. Even on a £5 pint, 13 pence per glass.
Yes, and this is why. Okay, I mean this is an average. Obviously, a lot of pubs are far below that, and that's why they're closing at an increasing rate.
Well,
and
look what happens when they do that. Yeah.
Well, there is. I mean, the profit margins. Okay, for some of them, it might look better than in some other industries, say for supermarkets or something, where profit margins are even lower. But there, they have very high turnovers. They can maybe compensate for that, and the trouble with running a pub is that it is often, it's not always a pleasant job. You have to deal with annoying customers. It's the sort of thing
where...
where...
in a pub? Did you ever work in a pub?
Sort of. Long story. I did national service, but I found a bit of a cop out, and it was effectively in a pub that was integrated in a youth hostel. Long story. That's a video in its own right.
I was going to say, the point of national service... Anyway, fine.
Yeah. I found a bit of a loophole.
Brilliant, sounds good. One where you're in a pub. Fine, but I mean, the real point here is, there ain't a lot left.
Well, we basically rely on, I'd say if there wasn't a certain pub romanticism in this country, there would be far fewer of them. So quite a lot of those people, they just love what they're doing. They're not primarily motivated by the money. And that's great. They benefit in other ways. They do something that they maybe find interesting and were maybe always dreaming about. But it's just that you cannot always rely on that. And if you make running the pub the sort of business that only an idealist would take on themselves, then, there's going to be, you're asking for a decline in the number of pubs over time. And that's been going on for quite some time.
Now, this is going to release, I think, about 24 hours before the next budget, where alcohol duty is expected, it might go up even further. So by the time, this could be outdated very quickly. It could be even worse very, very soon. So let's say you could wave a magic, let's say you're like the pub genie, and you could wave a magic wand, and which of this would you target? How would you fix this?
Well, there's a number of things. First of all, we pay a NIMBY tax as well. Apart from the net zero tax, we pay an even bigger NIMBY tax every time we go to a pub. I mean, everybody knows that rents are insanely high in this country. But of course, this isn't just true for residential renters. This is equally true if you are a pub landlord, you are renting a pub in some form, and you pay the same inflated rents as everyone else. So it's because we're not building enough new premises. That means that the person who wants to run a pub, they have to compete with the supermarket, with the residential developer, with the restaurant that could be in the same place. If we simply build enough so that you can have both the residential tower block and also the supermarket and the restaurant and the pub, and they don't have to compete with each other, that would take the pressure off the rent. So in part, it's simply because when we're not building enough buildings of any kind, and we are forcing pubs to compete with other users, and that's what's driving up rents.
But that's the point. There are so many hidden costs. NIMBY tax,
Yes.
net zero tax. That's not even necessarily reflected in what we're discussing here.
Yes, so there is a part that is explicitly labeled a tax. That is the part where the publican literally makes a transfer to the Chancellor of the Exchequer, basically.
Yep.
And that is the part that is labeled as a tax. But then you have regulatory costs contained at various steps, which you could think of as a tax of sorts, which definitely drive up prices. And that is like an invisible tax, which is far higher than the actual tax that we pay.
Right. Well, we might as well finish here. Might as well drink that profit. Kristian, thank you for joining us in the Guido Speakeasy.
My pleasure.
Cheers. There we are.
Not much left, but okay.